everyone. Hi. So hope all of you are doing great and welcome to session 3 or day 3 of CUET PG. So if you have not yet watched our previous 2 sessions of CUET PG, please do so. And today I have a new member with me, that is Kajal Kumari Yadav. She was our student at Vallath in our previous batch of CUET PG, and presently she is pursuing her masters in English from DU. So Kajal, would you like to say hi?
Hi everyone.
Okay. So Kajal is here with me, and I hope we all will enjoy this session. So let's get started. I will share my screen now. Right. Okay. So here we are at our CUET PG crash course day 3. So Kajal, would you like to read this?
Yes, ma'am. De Profoundly. Out of the depths is a letter written from prison by whom? John Bunyan, Oscar Wilde, Boethius, Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
So they profane this, which is a Latin title of or for out of the depths. It's a letter written from prison by whom? Is it Bunyan, Oscar Wilde, Boethius, or Yugi von Thiong'o? It is by Oscar Wilde. So they profane this, which means out of the depths or from the depths. It's a letter written by Oscar Wilde during his imprisonment in Reading Gaol. In its first half, Oscar Wilde talks about their previous relationship and extravagant lifestyle, which eventually led to Wilde's conviction and imprisonment for gross indecency. He indicts both Lord Alfred's vanity and his own weakness in acceding to those wishes. And in the second half of the letter, Wilde charts his spiritual development in prison and identification with Jesus Christ. So gradually, a spiritual element also comes in, whom he characterizes as a romantic individual artist. So it's very interesting how Wilde sees Christ as a romantic individualist artist. So it's very important. And the letter begins like this: Dear Bosie, his lover, and ends like this: Your affectionate friend, means Oscar Wilde himself. So please do look up all the works of Oscar Wilde. He was an atheist and a very important English writer. Walter Pater and Oscar Wilde were the advocates of aestheticism in England, right? Okay, so please do look up their works. Very important for exam. Next question.
Who said that poetry is the product, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, which results from emotion recollected in tranquility? The options are Wordsworth, Coleridge, Sade, Byron.
Right. So here we have before us a very familiar quote of romanticism or romantic theory, as we might like to say. And we know that this quote, that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings which results from emotions recollected in tranquility. It was none other than Wordsworth. Wordsworth believed poetry to be the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Wordsworth was an early romantic poet who believed in the divine power of nature and in the union of man and nature. And for him, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, which results from emotions recollected in tranquility. And he said this in his and Coleridge's groundbreaking work, Lyrical Ballads, which was actually a collection of experimental poems which wanted to see or test how much the language of common man is suited to the purpose of poetic pleasure. So please do look up the works of all the romantic poets, starting from Wordsworth till Keats, Byron, Shelley. Romantic criticism is also very important. So please do look up. Right, next.
The term willing suspension of disbelief was coined by Byron, Shelley, Keats, or Coleridge.
Right. So here we are with another concept of romantic criticism, that is willing suspension of disbelief. And this term or concept was termed by, or was propounded by Coleridge. Coleridge coined this term, willing suspension of disbelief. It refers to the idea that how we often willingly suspend our disbelief and see and enjoy movies or ghost stories. Suppose when we see or watch Superman movies or horror movies, we know that a man cannot fly. We know very well that a man can't jump from 100 floors and still not die. We know that all those things are fake. They're not true. Still, when we sit in a cinema hall and we watch those movies, we willingly suspend our disbelief and we enjoy those things as true. So that's what Coleridge called as willing suspension of disbelief. I'm willingly and voluntarily suspending my disbelief and enjoying the things around me, like poetry or movies or stuff like this. Right, next.
Which among the following is the biography of a notorious highwayman by Henry Fielding? Options are Robinson Crusoe, Captain Singleton, Gulliver's Travel, Jonathan Wilde.
Right. So we know that here we are with one of the most famous novels of the 18th century by Henry Fielding, and it is Jonathan Wilde. Jonathan Wilde was a very renowned criminal and a notorious highwayman of the 18th century, right? And his life has been narrated as a biography by Henry Fielding in The Life and Death of the Late Jonathan Wilde the Great. It's a satiric novel by Henry Fielding. It was published in 1743 in Fielding's Miscellanies, third volume, and it is a satiric account of the life of Jonathan Wilde. He was the underworld boss, and it is an experiment. This novel is an experiment in the various narrative genres that were popular at the time: serious history, criminal biography, political satire, and picaresque novel. Some have argued that it is mainly a satire on Britain's first Prime Minister, Robert Walpole, who was continuously charged by his political enemies with allegations of corruption. So please do look up all the major novels of the 18th century, of all the major novelists. So this one, Jonathan Wilde, it's like a biography of the criminal Jonathan Wilde. It was written by Henry Fielding, and these genres of picaresque novel or criminal biographies, they were very important. So also please be careful about which genre a particular novel has been written in, what or which socio-political cultural conditions governed the production and circulation of these novels. So be very careful. Right. Next.
Letter from Iceland is a dash in prose and verse by W.H. Auden and Louis MacNeice. The options are detective novel, gothic novel, travel book, science fiction novel.
So guys, you remember a few days back we did a current updates session on travel writing. We did it because this genre of travel writing is very important these days for any exam you sit for. Similarly, Letters from Iceland, it is a travel book in prose and verse by W.H. Auden and Louis MacNeice. So let me tell you a bit more about this work. Letters from Iceland. It's a travel book in prose and verse by W.H. Auden and Louis MacNeice, published in 1937. The book is made up of a series of letters and travel notes by Auden and MacNeice written during their trip to Iceland in 1936, compiling light-hearted private jokes and irreverent comments about their surrounding world. So it's a travel book. So please do look up the travelogues across the centuries, starting from 18th century onwards till the contemporary times. Please read more about them. Okay, so do look up these things before your exam. Next.
Hesperides is a collection of poems by Andrew Marvell, Robert Herrick, Thomas Carlyle, or George Heb- Herbert. Herbert, sorry.
Okay. So here we have the work Hesperides. And we have here the names of some cavaliers. Remember, the cavaliers were the court poets at the court of Charles I. So Hesperides, it's a collection of poems by none other than Robert Herrick. See, Hesperides, or the works, both human and divine, of Robert Herrick Esquire. So, Hesperides is a book of poetry published in 1648 by English Cavalier poet Robert Herrick. This collection of 1200 lyrical poems, his magnum opus, was published under his direction and established his reputation. It is replete with carpe diem sentiments, and the title refers to Hesperides, nymphs of the evening in Greek mythology. So here we have just talked about one Cavalier poet, Robert Herrick, but please do look up who were the Cavalier poets. They were poets at the court of Charles I, right? They were royalists. They supported monarchy. They supported King Charles I back then. So do look up who were the Cavalier poets, what were their major works, what were the themes they wrote about. Very important, right? Okay, next.
The Complete Angler is a book written by, and it was first published in 1653 by Richard Marriott in London. The options
Okay.
are Thomas Hobbes, Thomas Brown, Isaac Walton, and Jeremy Tyler.
Okay. So here we have another work, The Complete Angler. It was published in 1653 by Richard Marriott in London. But the question is, who wrote this work? It was written by Isaac Walton. So, The Complete Angler, or do you guys know what was this work about? This work was about fishing, right? So, The Complete Angler is a book by Isaac Walton, first published in 1653 by Richard Marriott in London. Walton continued to add to it for a quarter of a century. It is a celebration of the art and spirit of fishing in prose and verse. This work celebrates fishing, and it is celebrated as the contemplative man's recreation. Here, fishing is celebrated as the contemplative man's recreation. A man who thinks. He is a contemplative man. So here we are, or Isaac Walton believed that fishing is a contemplative man's recreation. Right? Okay. Next.
Preludes is a poem by Wordsworth, T.S. Eliot, Dylan Thomas, Seamus Heaney.
Okay. So, Preludes. It's a poem by Wordsworth or T.S. Eliot or Dylan Thomas or Seamus Heaney. Here we have just a few lines from the poem, and this is how the poem begins. So, you know, the tone of the poem can tell you who could have written this poem. The winter evening settles down, with smell of sticks in passageways. 6 o'clock, the burnt out days of smoky days. And now a gusty shower wraps the grimy scraps of withered leaves about your feet and newspapers from vacant lots. The showers beat on broken blinds and chimney pots. And at the corner of the street, a lonely cab horse stims and stamps, and then the lighting of the lamps. So clearly, it is not a countryside that is described here, no. If it had been a countryside, we could have thought it's Wordsworth, but no, it's very clearly a city which is described. And that also the end of the day is happening. It is almost dusk. Lights are getting lighted, or lamps are getting lighted in the houses. So it's a very exhausted city which we're talking about. And it is T.S. Eliot who wrote this poem, and this poem has few parts. It is divided into few parts. So Preludes, it's a poem by T.S. Eliot, composed between 1910 and 11. It is in turns literal and impressionistic, exploring the sordid and solitary existences of the spiritually moiled as a play out against the backdrop of the drab modern city. In essence, it is 4 poems rather than 1, and it is duly labeled as such. So 4 poems are there in this Preludes. Preludes comes to just 54 lines, and its 4 parts are uneven, irregular, and written in free verse, symptomatic of the speaker's stream of consciousness. So please do look up all the poems, all the major works of T.S. Eliot. He was the greatest modernist ever. So please do look up his poems. Right, next.
Which poem by Coleridge among the following was dedicated to Charles Lamb? The Alien Heart, reflection on having left a place of retirement. The lime tree, bower my prison, first at midnight.
Okay. So here the poems which we can see in the options, they all are conversation poems. He wrote 8 conversation poems, and among them, this Lime Tree Bower My Prison by Coleridge was dedicated to his school friend Charles Lamb. Right? So we all know how important Coleridge is. So this Lime Tree Bower My Prison, it's a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The poem discusses a time in which Coleridge was forced to stay beneath a lime tree while his friends were able to enjoy the countryside. Within the poem, Coleridge is able to connect to his friends' experience and enjoy nature through him, making the lime tree only a physical prison, not a mental one. Right, next.
In the second edition of The Rape of the Lock, in which year? Rosicrucian philosophy was used as the supernatural epic machinery. 1712, 1714, 1716, or 1718?
So we know that The Rape of the Lock, it's a mock heroic narrative poem by Pope, one of the most influential poets of the neoclassical era, and his most eminent work was The Rape of the Lock. It was first published in 1712, but when it came out in 1714, its second edition used Rosicrucian philosophy as the supernatural epic machinery. That's why we have these nymphs, gnomes, sylphs, and salamanders, right? So please do look up all the works of Pope, the Dunciad, Essay on Criticism, Essay on Man, The Rape of the Lock, Windsor Forest, Epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. All of these works are very important to look up, read their summaries, read about Pope. They're very important. Right, next.
The Indian Juggler is an essay by Charles Lamb, Hazlitt, Thomas De Quincey, or Thomas Love Peacock.
Okay. So all these essayists whom we have heard about, they're very important essayists of the late Romantic period. And the Indian Jugglers, it's an essay by Hazlitt. Hazlitt was one of the popular essayists of that time. So let's read a bit more about him. Okay. So Hazlitt was an English essayist, drama and literary critic, painter, social commentator, and philosopher. He is now considered as one of the greatest critics and essayists in the history of English language, placed in the company of Samuel Johnson and George Orwell. He is also acknowledged as the finest art critic of his age. Despite his high standing among historians of literature and art, his work is currently little read and mostly out of print. Okay. But he was a commendable essayist. He was wonderful. To look up his essays, to look up the collections of essays he brought out, and also do look up the essays of Love Peacock, De Quincey, Charles Lamb. Especially, De Quincey's essays like on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth, the Confessions of an English Opium Eater, that's an autobiographical work by De Quincey. So please get acquainted with who wrote which work like that, so that if such questions come, you can answer those questions in the exam, right? Next.
Spanish Armada was defeated in which year? 1551, 1588, 1642, or 1616?
Okay. So the defeat of Spanish Armada was one of the huge events during the Elizabethan era. So Spanish Armada was defeated in 1588, and that made English naval power as one of the biggest in the world. It happened during the reign of the Queen Elizabeth I, and it made her one of the most invincible queens ever. Right. Next.
Which popular genre of fiction does Jane Austen parody in Nottingham Abbey? Historical novel, epistolary novel, realist novel, and Gothic romance.
Okay, so we all are quite well versed with Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, and it's a parody of the Gothic romance because in this novel we see Catherine Morland. She's obsessed with reading Gothic novels, and gradually she starts thinking to be everything around her as Gothic. She starts believing everything she's reading as true. She blurs the boundaries between reality and illusion, right? And that's why this novel parodies Gothic romance, parodies this tendency of Gothic romance, right? Okay, next.
The Forsyte Saga, first published under the title in 1922, is a series of 3 novels and 2 interludes by H.G. Wells, Joseph Conrad, John Galsworthy, or Arnold Bennett.
Okay, so the Forsyte Saga, it's a series of 3 novels and 2 interludes by John Galsworthy, right? So the Forsyte Saga, first published under the title in 1922. It's a series of 3 novels and 2 interludes published between 1906 and 21 by the English author John Galsworthy. And these novels chronicle the vicissitudes of the leading members of a large upper middle class English family that is similar to Galsworthy's. Only a few generations removed from their farmer ancestors, its members are keenly aware of their status as new money. The main character, the solicitor and connoisseur, Soames Forsyte, sees himself as a man of property by virtue of his ability to accumulate material possessions, but that does not succeed in bringing him pleasure. So John Galsworthy, H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett, Joseph Conrad, all of them are wonderful and very important novelists of the early 20th century. So please do look up their novels, and also, the high modernists like Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, D.H. Lawrence, very important. Please do look up their works. Next.
The term tabula rasa stands for blank mind, full mind, perlepsarian state, imaginative mind.
Okay. So it was John Locke, as we can see in the picture here. He talked about our mind as tabula rasa. He supported empiricism, the strand of philosophy which believes that sense experience is the sole source of our knowledge. So, according to John Locke, when we are born, when we come to this world as a baby, then our mind is like a tabula rasa, like a blank slate or blank mind. See this picture? So, tabula rasa means like a blank slate or blank mind. So, since John Locke supported empiricism, which believes that our sense experience is the only source of our knowledge, so uh, he supported the idea that as we grow up and gather experiences, we develop our knowledge system. Otherwise, when we are born as a baby, our mind is blank. It's like a blank slate, tabula rasa. He was an empiricist. Clear? Next.
The Romantics exalted the role of creative imagination, adherence to classical unities, rationality of a man, the authority of the church.
Okay, so this is one thing which is like a basic idea and which we all know. The movement of Romanticism developed around creative imagination. So imagination was the vortex around which the movement of Romanticism flourished. It was the driving force. Creative imagination was the driving force, the impetus towards or for the movement of Romanticism, right? So the Romantics exalted the role of creative imagination, spontaneous expression of free emotion, spontaneous expression of our emotions, imagination. These things were prioritized during Romanticism, right? Next.
Tennyson's Ulysses is a poem expressing the need for going forward and braving the struggles of life, or an elegy, or a love sonnet, or a mock heroic poem.
So here we have Tennyson's Ulysses. It's a dramatic monologue where Ulysses, we see he has come back home to Ithaca after many, many years. But after coming back to his home, he is feeling restless. He is not satisfied with this life at home. And he's yearning for adventures and further travels, further experiences. He's feeling really restless and claustrophobic at home, and he's yearning for further adventures in life. So Tennyson's Ulysses is a poem expressing the need for going forward and braving the struggles of life. It's a dramatic monologue by Tennyson. All right. Do look up all the major works of Tennyson. He was the most important Victorian poet, right? Okay. Next.
Choose the wrongly matched pair. Arvind Adiga, The White Tiger, Amit Chaudhary, Odysseus Abroad, Arundhati Roy, Necrophilus, David Davido, The House of Blue Mangoes.
Okay. So here you have to match or identify the work which has been wrongly matched with its author. The White Tiger, Aravind Adiga, right. Odysseus Abroad by Amit Chaudhary, correct. Narcopolis by Arundhati Roy, it's wrong because Narcopolis was a novel by Jeet Thail. It's not by Arundhati Roy. Okay, so do brush up Indian literature, don't forget. Okay, next.
Art for art's sake, becoming a rallying cry for the aesthetics, the symbolist, the imaginist, or the art novice school.
So we all know this. In the first question itself, when we talked about Oscar Wilde, we talked about aestheticism, right? So we all know art for art's sake became a rallying cry for the aesthetes, right? Okay, next.
Daffodils is a poem written by Robert Herrick, William Wordsworth, John Keats, or P.B. Shelley.
This is a poem we all have read in school, I guess. So we obviously, Daffodils, it's a great, marvelous, beautiful poem by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. You know, that same thing of, Wordsworth's love for nature, his idea of union of man with nature. And, nature, he has always seen nature as a source of inspiration, as a source of solace. So that's all the ideas which gets reflected in this poem as well. How nature is a source of inspiration, creation, solace, and peace for Wordsworth, right? So I think that's all for today. Yes. So I hope you guys really liked the questions we came up with and the discussion. So if yes, please like the video and share this video with your friends, so that all the CUET PG aspirants out there can benefit from this video. And we will be coming with more again on Monday, a new session and new questions. In the meantime, please do keep studying. Please do keep reading a lot. Keep in mind the syllabus. Keeping in mind the syllabus, keep reading thoroughly. Please work hard because the exam is just around the corner. So please prepare well. And with that, Kajal, shall we wrap up the session for today?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So do you have any tips or tricks to tell our students?
Just don't panic, be relaxed and calm and focus. Just
Okay,
don't
yes.
panic.
Right. Don't panic. Please stay calm, relaxed. have food, take sleep, take rest, and please prepare well and don't get anxious. All right. Bye. Take care. See you